I'd like to spend a few minutes and talk about the science of inequality, which most definitely seems like a migration in a direction of all for some and none for all. In May of 2014, there was a special issue of Science magazine dedicated to the science of inequality, and I'd like to express my appreciation to Jeff McDonald for reading all the articles and putting the set of relationships together. So hopefully I have a better understanding of what contributes to inequality, and maybe after this you might also. We'll see. So, from historical perspective, whoever had the best lands, the best resources, tended to leverage them to develop their own set of resources better than anyone else. So it promoted inequality. And typically, development, countries, cities, towns, wherever, is not something that happens on an equal basis. So the tendency is for any kind of development to promote some level of inequality, and inequality tends to promote poverty. Those who develop more rapidly amass more resources than others. There isn't enough left, typically enough left for others, and they end up in poverty. The difficulty with poverty, though, is that it diminishes educational opportunities, which would promote skills, which would diminish poverty. So we end up with a vicious reinforcing structure. And poverty tends to create psychological pressure, which promotes risk aversion, which further promotes poverty. And that psychological pressure and risk aversion tends to promote inequality, which promotes more poverty. So we have another reinforcing structure, vicious again, of course. And poverty tends to create intergenerational stress, which promotes psychological pressure, resulting in more risk aversion, promoting more inequality, and therefore more poverty. So we end up with another vicious reinforcing structure, promoting inequality and poverty. The psychological pressure had a tendency to have a negative impact on one's health, which tends to promote more intergenerational stress, which adds to more psychological pressure. So we have another vicious reinforcing loop. And that intergenerational stress tends to diminish social mobility, which would in fact improve the health, though since it is tending in a negative direction, we end up with another vicious reinforcing structure. And the idea of poverty to education, to skills, to intergenerational, psychological, we end up with an intergenerational reinforcing structure, which is also vicious, promoting simply more inequality and more poverty. And the risk aversion tends to minimize or diminish the likelihood of social mobility, which would promote health but therefore doesn't, because it's in fact being diminished, therefore creating more intergenerational stress, more psychological pressure, and more risk aversion. So we have another vicious reinforcing structure, promoting more risk aversion and diminishing social mobility. And that, in fact, has the effect of further promoting inequality and poverty, and therefore diminishing social mobility. And we have yet one more vicious reinforcing structure. So what we end up with is 9 vicious reinforcing structures that simply ensure the persistence of inequality and poverty. And with all of these reinforcing structures pushing things in the direction of inequality and poverty, does it in fact ensure that inequality, mass inequality and poverty will be with us forever? Or is there a way out of this dilemma? And if there is, I'd appreciate your thoughts on it. So go ahead and post comments in the discussion available on the perspective page in the wiki, and hope you found this meaningful and not too depressing. Take care. Bye.